Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the invitation and to being here in Stockholm again. I've been here several times presenting my work here, also at this academy, also in this room. So just to summarize my own work, what my challenge has been in the last 30 years of my career, my entire career, is this situation where we have an interdependent planetary system marked by human domination, human impact, the Anthropocene, and we have a world that is still organized in 193 independent countries with independent currencies, independent ministers, independent prime ministers, independent governments in many, many ways. So that is a mismatch that has been driving my entire career for the last 30 years. And my challenge has been to find governance systems that can match these two, that can match the political system and the planetary system at the same time. So I was looking for the last 30 years for systems of global governance that are effective in steering our planetary systems, that are just in the sense of planetary justice, not just privileging some parts of the planet and some communities, and also democratic systems of governance that can really steer our system in a way that is accountable, legitimate, and democratic. And this was a challenge for my last 30 years. And I could talk about this for a long time. I've spent a lot of time also in working with the United Nations. I've just been there 2 weeks. And those who come for the evening ceremony will see a movie in which I'm walking up and down the flags and representing Earth system governance in action, so to speak, with my little rucksack. The camera was next to me. I won't talk about this in detail. And the reason is I talked about this in Stockholm already 6 times. I looked at my archive. I have 6 presentations that I held in different locations in Stockholm, and they all had Earth system governance in past and future in the title. So I don't want to bore you, and I don't want to get you into finding out the little details about what Frank has changed in the last presentation. Rather, I want to talk about something else, but also a much broader topic. And I think it's equally important. And that is the role of political science in the larger system of global change research, and the role of political science, how it can deal and should deal with the challenges of global change and Earth system transformation. Political science and the Anthropocene, that is more or less the title of my talk. And I'm looking very much forward then also to the commentators, but also to your questions, both from the political sciences to the extent that you are from the social science, political science, but also for the natural science. We have a discussion about the role of what political science can actually mean for the larger endeavor of global change science, Earth system science. And here I think that's very humbly to say so. The social science and political science in particular have to learn from natural sciences in one important aspect, which is global collaboration. The natural scientists, many of you are from natural scientists, you guys have worked together for more than 100 years in global research programs, starting, I put some of them here on the slides, starting with the International Polar here in 1882, and then throughout many, many other global research programs have been set up where natural scientists have worked together on understanding the oceans, understanding the atmosphere, understanding the polar regions together, sharing data, sharing money, sharing institutions, having joint science plans. This has been a tradition, experience of the natural sciences for at least 100 years. Global change science is the same. It has also started with the natural sciences. I mean, this slide, of course, many of you will recognize because many of you have been leaders of these processes, starting with the original IGP and the World Climate Change Research, then Diversitas. The IHDP was, of course, part of this community as a social science program. I will come back to this. And now Earth System Science Partnership, and the most recent incarnation is Future Earth, a large network where also global change scholars are working together. And now the question is, what does it mean for political science? And political science has been for many, many years, I see some political scientists smiling here a little bit, it has been different for many, many years, especially when I started. When I started in the 1980s and 1990s to study political science, it was very different. It was marked. This is the building where I started. This is where I got my bachelor and my master degree in Berlin at that time. It was marked by a high degree of individual scholarship. So essentially, you were expected to be alone, to sit there in your nice sofa, you smoked a cigar, you wrote a book, you write a book, and you didn't collaborate. You did this multidisciplinary, so you might have had a coffee with a sociologist or a lawyer, but that was the maximum of collaboration. Essentially, you stayed in your own discipline. It was national. I mean, I studied in German. All my professors spoke German. We read German books. I wrote in German. And the same was done across the borders in France and other countries. So we had this national language communities, which meant essentially that nobody could understand what we are doing, unless you were multilingual then sometimes. But it was a very national discourse and very theory-oriented. It was really a time when theory was the biggest achievement in the world. I mean, to have a big theory, the theory of international relations, the theory of the state, or so these were the big things. And I believe, and that's also an important part of my career, that this is no longer meeting the current challenges of the Anthropocene, to speak here in Stockholm terms in a sense. So what we need instead, I believe, is moving in the political sciences also to move from individual and small group research to global collaboration, to move from a disciplinary approach to an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary approach, to move from national research communities to global research alliances, also in political science, also in the social sciences, global partnerships, and also to still work on theoretical questions. We should not end theoretical debates, but we should at the same time focus on the large societal questions of our time. I mean, 750 million people woke up this morning, had not enough food on their plate. And these are very, very big questions: climate change, biodiversity, all these questions. And those questions need to be addressed. Theory is important, but we really have also to address the main challenges as a guiding motivation of our work. And that is what this Earth System Governance Project tries or does take up as a challenge. This is what the Earth System Governance Project has been created for. As a global community, where scholars from the entire planet work together on joint questions in political science and related disciplines, pluralistic, meaning working together with people who have different paradigms. And that's very important, of course, for political science and other social sciences. There is not a unified language. You have constructivists, you have institutionalists, you have realists, you have Marxists, you have all kinds of different people that totally disagree on what politics actually is. And you have to bring them all together, and that is a pluralism that we try to achieve. Interdisciplinary, working together with the natural sciences also. Many of them are here in this room and have been collaborating with, I mean, Carl, for example, is a lead faculty member of the Earth System Governance Project. So many have worked together for a long time. And also engaged. Engaged means trying to change the world, not only contributing the next academic article and not writing the next book, but really trying to make a contribution to a better world. And that is what this Earth System Governance Project has been about since it has been created in about 20 years ago. It is a network of governance scholars, sustainability scholars, with conferences that have been held since 2007. Some of you have been at these conferences. More than 700 researchers are formally registered. Many thousands more are engaged in different ways in this network, with lead faculty, senior fellows, research fellows. We have 3 book series, one with MIT Press, 2 with Cambridge University Press, a big one and a small one. Our own journal has been set up, which is quite successful in the political sciences. An own foundation has been set up to serve as a legal and financial support mechanism for this project. So this is all about this Earth System Governance Project. It's still very active and has this week actually its annual conference. But nonetheless, there are lots of challenges, and this is the main part of my presentation, is about the challenges or the problems or the issues that come up when you try to have political science collaboration at the global level in the field of Earth system transformation, Anthropocene, global change. So this is kind of the Scylla and Charybdis in a sense. So we are the little boat that you can see on the slide and trying to not to fall into any of these traps and not to fall into any of these big issues. That is kind of the challenge what we do, and that is what I want to talk about as an engagement for a discussion. So it's not a lecture per se, it's more like a conversation starter, and I would really like to hear your comments from the political sciences and also from the natural sciences or other social sciences to engage in some of these discussions. First question is the challenge of fragmentation integration. Fragmentation is the history of political science. We have kind of, so if you want to bring together 1,000 political scientists, they all will have a different view, a different theory, different paradigm. How can you bring them all together? How can you try to integrate them? This is a different challenge from the natural sciences, where it's more about like data calibration. So I think it's quite easy to collaborate in a sense, because the paradigms, the core ideas are the same. And that's different in the social sciences. So we have, of course, a steering committee, which you see on this photograph in a sense, but what is the steering committee actually steering? I mean, how do you steer 1,000 political scientists and bring them together in a joint project? And what we did is, and still do in the Earth System Governance Project, is to work on a number of more or less clearly defined boundary concepts. Concepts that are somewhat understandable for everybody, where everybody can join and can work together in a joint communal language and be together in a research approach, despite the fact that you might have a different paradigm, that you might come from a different community, that you might speak in a different language. And these are some of the examples. On the left side, some of you have seen already our concepts such as architecture, agency, adaptiveness, accountability, access, allocation. I presented this here already 15 years ago at one point. These were the 5 A's originally, the 5 boundary concepts that the Earth System Governance Project has used. They were more elaborated, of course, in a science plan that was about like 100 pages, where we really laid this out in more detail. And these were the boundary concepts where people could form communities. They were an architecture research community. These were those people who looked at the hardware of governance, how the state is organized, how the UN is organized, how treaties functioned. That was the architecture. Agency was more about who are the agents in Earth System governance. The state, but also the private sector, NGOs, scientists. So that was the community that formed around the concept of agency and was quite successful. So meetings were organized, workshops were organized, books have been published under this heading. So this is how the concepts have been evolved. Then we became more elaborate, and this is on the top line. You can't really see it because the photo is not very good. It's the newest incarnation that has been done, not by me, but by new generation of the New Direction team. Victor has been part of that team who put this all together. It's much more sophisticated, much better, of course, but it has still the same core idea of boundary concepts to offer them to scientists, to social scientists, to bring communities together. The other challenge is the external boundary work. I mean, where on Earth is the boundary of Earth System governance? Because it is, of course, very broad, but what is not Earth System governance? If you want to build up such a community, where do you draw the boundaries to other communities that you do not or you want to integrate? And that has been also very difficult. I mean, like, how do you bring in the lawyers? How do you bring in the economists? How do you bring in sociologists? How do you work with the natural sciences? And here we had really the approach of bringing in community by forming also boundary concept for them. For example, to bring in the lawyers, we developed the concept of Earth System law, which brought in a number of very progressive lawyers who worked on the Anthropocene and the legal challenges. And this is a very vivid, very active task force on Earth System law, where lots of articles and books have been published, and trying to understand what is actually law in the Anthropocene. How does law change because of the new imperatives of the Anthropocene? This is one approach how the community has grown and integrated legal scholars and legal ideas into the larger fold of Earth System governance. And then the other approach is, of course, pluralism, and that I mentioned already, is very, very important in the social sciences. You have to accept that people disagree fundamentally. I mean, how do you bring together somebody who studies institutions, in the Elinor Ostrom tradition, for example, with somebody who's a Marxist and wants to overthrow the government, in a sense? How do you bring them together and jointly discuss issues of planetary change and Earth System governance? And that is very important, to bring in this openness, not to exclude anybody, to include everybody. And I think we have been relatively successful in some of these activities. So this is the boundary work we had. Another boundary is, of course, seeing also Johan Roykström and others in this room, the relationship with the natural sciences. And there are 3 points that I think it's important to make. Number one, of course, Earth System governance or social science in itself is not an implementation science. Sometimes with natural scientists outside this room, there's others. No? So there's sometimes this perception that we figure out what needs to be done, and then we call the social scientists, social scientists will figure out how to explain it to the government, or how to implement it, or how to fix it in a sense. No? And that's not the idea, because some of the problems are fundamentally political. And there's actually, the problem is a political problem, or institutional problem, it's a governance problem. And so therefore the role of social science and political science, I think, is quite different from purely being an implementation research or acceptance research. Another point I think is very important, that some of our members in the Earth System Governance project also see themselves as being a critical corrective of some of the work in natural science or in global change science as such. Whereas global change science is being seen as the object of research, where science is seen as a political contestation, science is seen as a political process, and scientists are sometimes seen as political actors. The IPCC, for example, is a typical case. That is a scientific network, many of you are part of it, but it has become a very powerful political actor. When the IPCC speaks, it is a voice. It can change to some extent the way how we understand politics, the way how we understand the climate problem. So this is certainly also important to see these kind of networks as political actors. And the last point is also very important for our understanding of Earth System Governance as a project within Future Earth. A certain independent space is also very important. And I call it sometimes the danger of the governance scholars to become hyphenated scholars. Hyphenated would mean water governance, biodiversity governance, climate governance, ocean governance, etc. That you have lots of hyphenated governance scholars, but you don't have a community anymore where the big societal questions can be discussed, such as democracy, such as power, such as authority, such as conflict, whatever it is. So these big questions need to be addressed, and for that discussion, you need to have an independent, autonomous space where social scientists get together. And that is what the Earth System Governance Project always tries to be in this larger global change Future Earth research network. Now I come to another challenge. It is a challenge for us, but it's a challenge for everybody. It's for Future Earth, for all global change programs. It's a challenge of global justice and diversity. How do we organize science in a world that is so fundamentally unequal as our planet is, and the inequality among countries is actually increasing? What does it mean for global change science to address these kind of issues? So we did some research ourselves, and it's kind of my own research, about the marginalization of Global South scholars. So it's kind of a lot of research data that we have collected. I just give some examples. We looked at the citations, for example, of the Global Sustainable Development Report from 2019, one of the standards, most influential global change reports, in a sense, from the UN system. With a very diverse team of authors. We looked at all the references. There were 400, I see some actors, 429 references. And we and our student team looked at all the references. 1% of the references referred to a scholar from the least developed countries, and 87% of the references refer to work that is being produced in an OECD country. Not necessarily from scholars from the Global North. Of course, there are many scholars from the Global South living in the Global North, so it's not that black and white, but more or less it's OECD universities that produce the research for that particular UN report. The same as if you look at conferences. We had 13 conferences. We calculated the participants. We looked through all the participant lists. And in this particular sample, 10 to 20% of the participants are from the Global South, 80% are from the Global North. And these are global conferences, including the Earth System Governance Project conferences, actually. The same is for steering committees, which are also largely dominated from scholars from the Global North. We looked at journals, like these are 5 journals, Earth System Governance, Environment Politics, GSC, GEP, and Global Sustainability. And we looked at authorship. And there you see it on the slide, the share of authors from the least developed countries is less than 2%. So it's also, again, journals which are very heavily empirically dominated by Global North authorship. And that is a challenge. And what to do is, of course, very difficult if you run a global research program without actually a lot of money. So what we try to do, we try to change this. We really have seen this as a problem for the last 20 years. And for the last 20 years, we try to change it and try to address this in various ways, by, for example, setting up a global South-South partnership where our Global South scholars from different continents work together, collaborate, and trying to address these issues in a way that South and South is collaborating. Working together with established networks from the Global South, such as Southern Voice, which is a think tank network from the Global South, where we are intensifying our collaboration. The journal that we run, Earth System Governance, is open access, so everybody can download the articles wherever you are. And we try to work now with Earth System Governance Foundation to solicit funding for people from the Global South. So there are a variety of ways how we try to do it. But I must, of course, say it's not working that well. It's just a matter of resources. I mean, there's also limitations. We would like to have much more money to really invest, but essentially it's a matter of global injustice and global structures that we cannot change just as scientists that easily. We also have set up a task force on planetary justice to really emphasize and focus on questions of justice in our research community. And now I come to the last part, and this is also the main part for the discussion, I hope to be later, is the very complex and difficult challenge of scholarship versus activism. And political science is a clear example where there has never been any clear agreement on what is actually the role of political science. There's, on the one hand, there are those that say science is just informing the rulers about how to do better. That's kind of the old, I mean, Machiavelli was very famous for that, who just said, I'm advising the ruler on how to be more successful as a ruler. That's his old idea, speaking truth to power. And there's this other totally different view, and this is where I kind of grew up in the West Berlin political science environment, where people said political science is actually the science of emancipation. It's a science of liberation. And these chaps, I mean, professors of mine, they would say it's political science is theory of revolution. That was the old idea. So they said, we are the scientists who are not advising the ruler, we're throwing them over. We kind of change the ruler and have a different kind of system. That was, it's a different perspective. And the question is, what is today the challenge of global change science? I mean, where is global change science just a community, or the Royal Academy, for those of you who are here? Is the role only to advise the king or the parliament, or is the role different? A different role? How do you bring in ideas about liberation, emancipation, freedom, and justice, etc.? What's the role of individual scientists? Do we as scientists have an obligation or a function, in a sense, to take on our academic dresses and blockade a highway in Netherlands to protest fossil fuel subsidies, in a sense? Or should we rather stay out of these demonstrations and rather stay in our offices and write more papers and contribute to these kind of debates from an academic level, just informing but not taking action as scientists? I think that's also a very fundamental question for bodies such as the Royal Academy. And I bring now one example that was a personal wish from Victor, in a sense, to talk about that, because it's an example of these discussions where all of these points come together. And it's also part of my recent work, because for the last 2 years, I have taken positions and have worked quite actively on the issue of solar geoengineering, which is essentially a set of proposed, still hypothetical technologies to artificially cool the planet by blocking parts of the sunlight. So the core idea is you need to have maybe 1,000 airplanes that would fly in the stratosphere, eject certain substances such as sulfur, and that would artificially cool the planet, mimicking the behavior of volcanoes, for example. And you would have to do this for hundreds of years, otherwise it doesn't work. You can never stop it again. And that's a political proposal. No, it's a scientific proposition. There's some scientists are actively proposing this, and it's very controversial. Some people say this is just a mad idea, it's very dangerous, you can't govern it, that's what I would say. And has huge risk of various Earth system parameters that cannot be controlled. And therefore, a group of scientists, and I was the initiators of this actually, came together and organized an open letter signed by now 550 scientists. Some of you are signatories of that, calling for an international non-use agreement on solar geoengineering, like an international ban on these technologies. And I like this one very much, like Bill Gates wants it, but these experts want to stop it. That's kind of I really like this, 500 against Bill Gates, and hopefully we will win. Anyways, okay. So, and there's also a lot of politics about it, like the group of African countries has supported this openly. So the group of African countries came with a proposition and said they are supporting a non-use mechanism. The country of Vanuatu and Fiji, they have openly called also for a non-use agreement. So it really enters the political space now. But the point I want to make is, what does it mean for science? So there's just more examples in a sense. So it's not only an open letter, we have a website, we have an organization behind it, we have this 550 people. There are also quite a few Volvo Prize winners who have also signed this. Eduardo Bondisius on one of these slides. Anyway, they're all on our website. And concretely, and that makes it also then the challenge in a sense, we called for 5 different points. One is not to, we ask governments and the UN not to deploy these technologies, of course, once they would be developed, but also to prohibit national funding agencies from supporting them. And that is where a lot of criticism has been raised. So we ask whatever, FORMAS or MISTRA, whatever it is, not to fund the development of such technologies. And that is where some people took issue with, because some people work on these issues. Also to ban outdoor experiments. That's also a very Swedish issue, because there was a discussion to have outdoor experiments in the north of Sweden. Not to grant any patent rights, which is motivated by the point that nobody should own the patent for planetary modification, and also to object to the institutionalization of these technologies in international institutions, which could mean the IPCC. I mean, that's also one example. Not that the IPCC should not discuss it, but it should not be integrated into the models and scenarios of IPCC, because then it could have a major factor on them, because these technologies are maybe relatively cheap. And if you bring them in a cost-benefit analysis, you might have a very interesting graph that for a few billion euros, you could change it. And because they're also hypothetical, I mean, they're not yet invented. Now, these are the propositions, and just show them also because from a scientific perspective, science community perspective, maybe also Royal Academy perspective, they are not trivial. They're kind of important points also for scientists to discuss what is the role of science in these matters. If you want to know more about it, we have, of course, a website, and it's all laid out in more documentation and the letters, etc. And then it enters also the political frame. And that's also, for me, a new space in a sense, so that I am engaging. I mean, I used to be a very happy political scientist in the Earth and Governance Project, but now I'm talking to governments in a very interesting way. So I give presentations in different capitals. So I talk to people from the African countries. I talk to Vanuatu. I give presentations in France, in Germany, other places, discussing these issues. So you really enter, in a way, a political space which is more political than what many global change science programs are used to. Also interacting with civil society. You see, this is the statement of the Climate Action Network, which is an alliance of more than 2,000 climate-related NGOs. And they have taken over the platform. So they also support, they called upon all of their members to endorse this non-use agreement. And many of these activities in New York and Nairobi are taking place. And I have now 2 slides, and these are the slides, my last slides, for the discussion, in a sense, for the discussion maybe for the panelists, but also for the entire audience. I mean, how do we deal with these how do we position science as institutions, but also individually, because every scientist has to take implicitly a position. I mean, do you sign these kind of letters? Maybe there are also other letters you might want to sign, or you stay away from signing letters and just say, I'm just a scientist, I work to my articles in Science and Nature in different ways. And these are 3 things that are important to me. Number 1 is transparency about value judgments. I think that's very important. For example, one big argument about the governance of geoengineering is to what extent can you govern this in a democratic and fair way? Because theoretically, you could imagine an effective way of governing this who's very imperialistic. Like one big country which has military means, airstrips around the planet. Let's say the United States of America, for example, they have 800 airstrips around the planet. Technically, such countries with some support of like-minded country coalitions could do this alone. And my value system says this is not good. So it should be an agreement with all the countries in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia. Everybody should be involved. And that is a normative judgment, which I'm very happy to have in a sense, but that's important to say this is a normative judgment. There could be a possibility of an imperialistic solution, which I don't share. Some people use the word of stratospheric imperialism as a solution. Anyway, that's important, the transparency. The other one is keeping it firmly building on science, and this I do. I think all of us do, in a sense, building it on the information from the political science in my case, so I'm not discussing in public the natural science aspects, for there are the other experts who are from theoretical physics and climatology discussing that, so really basing it on empirical work in the social sciences in this case, and also maintain boundaries with the civil society movements. We make it clear not to merge the two. So in this particular activity, we frame it as a letter that is being signed by academics. So it can be signed only by academics. So technically we say, it's always what is an academic, next question. So we say you have to have a PhD, work academically, and or work towards a PhD. I mean, like senior PhD student. That's how the self-definition of an academic. NGOs cannot sign, they are endorsing. So we have a list of endorsements for NGOs, but they are not signatories. The signatories are just academics because we frame this as an academic activity. But that's kind of very complex in a sense where to draw the boundaries, and we really try to keep it very clear. Also in meetings, very clear, we are the academics and there are the NGOs. You might have the same positions, but sometimes they also have different positions. And quite often they are much more radical than we are on many issues. And also the language is different. And then the point for discussion, also this is kind of then the discussion slide is, number one is the basic discussion in a sense, what is the role of scientists in the Anthropocene? Not in the way just, I mean, what does it mean scientifically, but what is the role of a social scientist or a natural scientist in the Anthropocene? Do we have to change the way how we organize our activities, how we see ourselves? Is this, what is the position there? The second one is, it's related. I mean, transformative science is quite often mentioned, but how do we interpret this in practice? Is it just more studies? Do we have to write more papers and more books and more scientific papers? Or just louder calls? I mean, just changing language, becoming more activist, or also engaging more like in political activism like Science Rebellion does in some places, where also the question is, when are you a scientist? How do you engage? And then another question is, I think it's also a very complex one, where do you don't take a position as a scientist? And that is the Plato question. I call it sometimes Plato's planet in a way. So that Plato's argument was, once the philosophers, he said, what he means actually is scientists. I mean, in modern terms, he would say, Plato would say, when the government is only the scientist, if the scientists are the government, everything will be fine. So that is a very autocratic idea, of course. But it's kind of I mean, in a sense, he says we don't need any elections, we don't need anything. Once the philosophers, the scientists are the kings, we will be the best world of everything, or at least when the kings are educated. That was his idea. But what does it mean for us? I mean, in certain networks, what does it mean for the IPCC? What does it mean also for our internal systems? And when we have climate litigation, for example, where scientific information becomes very important, what is the role of scientists in a democratic state? So on the one hand, you might want to demonstrate and argue. On the other hand, the decisions have to be taken by the people, not by the professors. And this is a very difficult terrain to walk this line, being not only just laid back, but also not trying to become the king, because there is already democratically elected government. And the last point, and that's maybe also interesting for some of the commentators from Nobel, for example, is what does it mean for organizations? There's one challenge is for the individual researcher to take a position, but what does it mean for those of us who are members and maybe even leaders of scientific networks, organizations, academies, etc.? And that is very difficult. Like the Earth System Governance Project, for example, has never taken a political position per se. There's no letter or any other statement that has been signed by the Earth System Governance Project, because we always said we believe in pluralism and diversity, and not everybody might agree. It's also very difficult to have a decision-making process. But that is different for some professional associations like the Meteorological Association, maybe some others also from the UN system, where scientific organizations start to take positions also in geoengineering. And then the question is also who is taking these decisions actually in very big professional associations. How does the American Meteorological Association really take a position on something? Is there a voting process? And what happens if there are no majorities, whatever, how is it being done? And that, I think, is a big question for any big organizations. How do you take positions, if you take them, or do you just say we are supporting discussions, and then individual scientists can get together and organize an open letter, but we are not signing or we're not taking position as an organization? I think these are very complicated questions for the Royal Academy, for example, which is normally one where the positions are being taken, but there are also very clear processes. But these matters are, I mean, geoengineering, for example, is dynamite as a political issue for any organization. So I think to touch it as an academy, I think would really be a very interesting procedure for any big scientific network. Good, I'm closing here. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. That was wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Galas. I'm Program Director at the Beijer Institute here at the Academy. I'm also Associate Professor at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, Stockholm University. We will have a panel conversation. So we have three brilliant panelists who will join us. So we have Robert Blaszek from Stockholm Resilience Centre, Associate Professor, Professor Emily Boyd from Lund University, and then Anna Sjöström from the acting CEO of the Nobel Foundation. I should say before we begin, and I'm going to invite Emily up first, is that it warms my heart, Frank, that you got this award. As a political scientist myself, it is exactly like you mentioned. It is challenging to work in a interdisciplinary space as a political scientist, and I think the Frank and the Earth System Governance project has been a lighthouse in that sense for us youngish scientists in this domain. So thanks a lot. It's been extremely inspiring, and it's something to hold on to in the very stormy waters of science. But first of all, I want to invite Emily and hear some of your reflections.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, the Academy. Thank you, and congratulations to Frank for this well-deserved accolade of your work. So thank you for a brilliant talk as well. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to live up to Frank's brilliant speech there, but I've got 5 minutes to comment and say something in response. So we were sent a set of questions. I'm not going to try and go through this in a too linear form, but I'm going to try and engage with sort of key topics that have come up here. And the first one is around the question that Frank brings up around integration. So myself coming from an interdisciplinary background, both having worked very strongly with the social sciences for many years, but also coming from that tradition, and also then working together with scientists from the natural science, from climate science, from engineering, across the board within, I see also Leonard here today, and sustainability sciences. So I think that it is a question of relationships, ultimately, as a starting point. And I'm just going to say a bit about this. It's about relationships, it's about curiosity, and it's about openness, interdisciplinarity. And I think that if you have the context, the funding, the support, and the leadership to buy into some kind of common vision to advance some kind of collaborative science here, then as an endeavor, you can overcome many of these fragmentations that might occur. And it was what you were talking about, and your whole project that you've created here has been about that. But I also think fragmentation per se, or any kind of conflict or discord within science, is not a bad thing as well. And I think we need to keep that in mind. I think that fragmentation sometimes can lead to new pathways. And that discord can also keep things alive, and it can trigger new ideas. So whilst I think that we need to go on a path of integration, I think we can also allow for the things that don't work together so easily to come together and find a way to have those discussions and continuing. Where I would say we've succeeded in terms of our integration, I think that we've succeeded in going beyond our institutions. So I think what you've really done successfully here is creating a network of people that are coming from different ways of thinking and looking at the world and working together. But where I think we are failing, and have failed to some extent, is within our own institutions. I think we're failing within our own institutions and universities to go across those boundaries and borders in ways that we're succeeding to do within our networks out there. So it's something for us to think about. How do we actually go out of our bubbles within our universities to bring people into having those discordant or perhaps fragmented conversations in ways that are fruitful and interesting? Curiosity plays a big part in that. The next dimension here was about global diversity, and the justice dimension here, which Frank talks about. It's not a trivial one to engage with global diversity. So reconfiguring questions of power and privilege feature really strongly in this. And it relates to this notion that Frank's talked about decolonizing and decolonizing featuring all the way from our institutions through to the journals that we publish in, but also to the journals that we edit increasingly as we move upwards and onwards. And also making those of us working in sustainability science, how we make that truly global. And how do we do that? We have to engage with questions around recognition with qualities of process, of assessment, of bringing new voices and new ideas into the pool. And I think there also it's about a level of a redistribution of those opportunities. And like I said, it's not a trivial process that we're going through at the moment, but it is actually already happening. I mean, several of you have probably been in situations increasingly where you're asked to co-author or collaborate across Global North, Global South. And whilst some may feel like it's a mechanistic way to change things, perhaps we need those mechanisms to change things in the first place, and then we go as part of a transformation through those particular mechanisms. I think here we also need to think about what this whole notion of identity politics is. And I think that identity politics play a big role here as well. Those of you who are not so familiar with it, we're talking here about recognition of different voices, different places based on things like gender, religion, politics, sexuality, all these kinds of things that I would say the new Gen Z are really embedded with and engaging with, and we need to catch up with that. But those identity politics that do feature within this and the way we're going to do this global, diverse sustainability work, it shouldn't be captured by a few. It needs to be owned by many. This includes thinking about the scientific assessments, the networks and the journals that you talk about here. And one thing that really struck me with your talk was when you talk about emancipatory political science, whilst on the one hand, our engagement with being amongst people within groups, demonstrating or being part of that, I also think one of the things you've done here, which is your article, which identifies those inequalities, that kind of work will have impact. Because that opens up then for people to actually, based on that evidence, to be able to say, here in black and white, we see these inequalities. Now we can work from this. And we can together think about ways that we might grapple with that and move forward. So it might not always be the things that have an impact that are obvious. It might be the less obvious things. The things that we do every day as scientists might sometimes appear very boring, but actually have a huge impact, ultimately. How am I doing for time? 1 more minute. Oh, so much to talk about. So I think advocacy is a huge and important aspect, and I think we need to balance with what we do as researchers and scientists, and as educators as well. And I think this is not an easy one. I think this is very much related to individual preference and understandings and how they feel they want to engage in this kind of work. But where I do think we have a tricky and important conversation around this advocacy is, can we do advocacy while at the same time doing the best possible quality science that is as objective as possible out there? Because I think also what we can offer as researchers is to be critical, open and curious and consistent and transparent with our methods and approaches. So anyone could pick up the paper and copy the method and actually find, yeah, I can see how to do this. Where we get mixed up sometimes is when we're not providing that transparency because we're very emotional about the subject that we're working on. That we need to really consider and be very transparent about. So how do we feature in the Anthropocene? What is our role, and do we have a role? It just struck me as that I think that we've been doing in the social sciences work that is relevant for the Anthropocene for hundreds of years. And I think we're not succeeding in some areas. For example, we need to understand better how we can scale up things, how we can reach into collaborative forms and structures, and also, come out of our bubbles and so on. We do see that there are connections being made from the social sciences. For example, the IPCC Working Group 2 features a whole chapter, a whole book on adaptation vulnerability as an example of where the social scientists have really come into being part of the IPCC, and we can go further. I think we can offer methods and topics and theories and ideas, and the social scientists are reinventing themselves concurrently. I can list off a whole bunch of authors that you would probably recognize, some of which are in the audience today, including Frank, who are trying to reinvent and re-engage and to really take the social sciences into a realm where there's a connection with other disciplines. So I would say, yes, there is a role for social scientists. Yes, we can do better, but I think we've got a ton of work that could be fantastically valuable. I think that we should focus on engaging at the forefront. I think that what this Earth System Governance whole project has done has been at the forefront. So if you look back now on where you were when you all started all of this, I think you would say, oh gosh, this will be transformative, or you would hope it to be transformative, and it has been. So I think that we need to look at these kinds of initiatives and models and look forward and think, how can we do this into the future that has the same kind of impact? And I think that, individual scientists, I think we'll all go away and do our own work in the way we do it, but I think connecting up to one another and keeping that openness and curiosity and also finding our place within the bigger changing the world thing is the most important thing we can do. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful.
Sorry
Thanks,
if I went
Emily.
over.
Thank you so much, Victor. And first of all, congratulations to you, Frank, for this wonderful prize, the Volvo Environment Prize, and congratulations to everyone involved in that. A prize can be a very good thing to raise awareness of a topic and take the possibility to talk about different things that are related to the prize. So it's really nice to be here today. I am working with another prize, and what struck me like just an essence of what you talked about today was like knowledge-based institutions for the benefit of humankind, which is sort of what we talk about with the Nobel Prize. It's awarding discoveries and work that are for the benefit of humankind. And also listening to the discussion today, it's sort of, you see the path for the future in a way. You think about those big global challenges, what we are facing, and how the research as a society, as a community, should work together to solve these things, to make the world a better place for the benefit of humankind and for future generations. But it also like struck that I was going backwards in time. So this week we have been in this room, we have been deciding on the prizes for physics, chemistry, and the prize in economical sciences in the memory of Alfred Nobel. Many of the things that you are lifting now in your presentation and also in your comments, Emily, it's like almost the essence of Alfred Nobel, who initiated this prize 125 years ago with the thought of a globalized world with international collaborations, the need of talking between the disciplines, because he saw so clearly that there were different disciplines, but that you needed many of them to go to some kind of application or innovation, or the dialogue between states, or the peaceful dialogue that also wanted to be awarded. That is something that was so, at that time, in the end of the 19th century, something that was discussed and controversial. And then to use the science to make growth, to make change, to achieve peace, which is exactly the same things we are talking about now. And just looking back on the week, I don't know if you have followed the new Nobel Prizes. Last week, we awarded the basic discoveries that leads to that we can use AI, large language models, neural networks. The day after, we awarded also using AI to make new proteins, to predict how proteins look like, that we can make new medicines. It has been a breakthrough in chemistry that we now can make so much more proteins in order to cure a lot of diseases. We can predict protein structures for a new pandemic. We can rapidly produce things that we can predict how new viruses will work. But the AI can also be used to mislead, to share by bad actors to share information that is not true, to make frauds, to spread disinformation, for states and governments to undermine democracies. So a lot of technology and sciences can be used for both many good things and also bad things. And that is something that you were discussing in the end of your presentation also, the need for regulations, the need for ban, for control of new technologies. And that is a very complex question, of course, because leading to good things like gene splicing or editing for genes, cloning, development of nuclear powers for energy or for weapons. Many of if you look back in history, maybe some of the things that were discovered and developed was used for both good and bad things. How do we do that? And what kind of bodies do we have today to do that? And also, as you lifted, the difficulty to being a politician today, like the quote that you lifted, maybe only scientists should be politicians, or maybe not, because you really need a broad knowledge to be a policymaker and decision maker today. You need to know about society, and social sciences and scientists are extremely needed. But you also need to understand algorithms, the use of new technology, and to understand the implications of them in order to know if you should ban, regulate, let free, democratize the use of new knowledge like open access or publications. It's really complex questions, as well as the questions we are facing for the future that are really complex challenges needing everyone from the research community, from all disciplines, from all countries. And then to the question, who is looking for the benefit of humankind and for the benefit of the world? And one of the prizes just Monday in the field of economical sciences was the award of knowing how institutions are important to make growth in a society. Inclusive, open institutions based on democracy lead to wealth in a country. And that has now been proven by different models. And the researchers behind that, they went back to the 16th century and looked when, in the start of the Industrial Revolution, at that time, what triggered the start of the Industrial Revolution, where we saw an increased wealth, increased health. We live so much longer today, and that is caused by the benefits of science, of course. But then also that was the start of learned societies, academies, knowledge spread around the world. That together with those hand in hand led to new discoveries, but also the spread of information. And I think that we can see both the need for academies, but also this thing for the benefit of humankind, and who are taking this responsibility to talk about the benefit for the whole. We have some international organizations like the UN. We have now new research networks like the network that you have initiated. But where is the responsibility? And then we come to the policymakers, of course. We have to have responsibility and liability and knowledge. So these are, of course, extremely complex things that we will discuss a bit about, but it was a lot of food for thoughts. And I think when you work with the Nobel Prize, you often get the question that the Nobel Prize, that is a body that is international and non-politicized, well, should be, for the benefit of humankind. What kind of responsibility do you take? And that leads on to your last question. Should institutions or organizations be part of this? We have been working in a very nice collaboration with the Beijer Institute and the Stockholm Resilience Centre and, of course, the academies to make some kind of working together as a scientific community. And I strongly agree with your point that it's academics that should sign these kind of papers. If the Nobel Prize is involved, it should be the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences or the Nobel Assembly, our prize awarding bodies that has these competencies from the academic side. And we can endorse it as an organization, but the Nobel Prize by itself as an organization will not take activism or political stance, but that should be coming from the academic society. And I think the need for international networks between researchers, both in one field but in many fields, and then link that to some kind of political body and having this contact together. And I think we need those things for the future with the more global, and that is the whole spirit of Alfred Nobel. You know, and that is both him as a person, who was a globalized person living in many countries, speaking 8 languages, having businesses in many countries, but also this thing of having a dialogue and also then coming towards some kind of how to work together for the benefit of humankind. So I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and what a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And congratulations, Professor Biermann. I've been reading your papers for years. So nice to actually meet you, and what a way to meet you. So I have some slides. Should I click into those? There they are. So I will talk about 2 papers and 2 people, but let me start with the homework assignment I was given by Victor Gallas. He said, here's the event. You're going to be speaking at it. Look at these 4 questions. They're in the event announcement. And I read through the questions. You can see them too. And one after another, I fell into despair because I thought, I don't know the answers to any of these. What do I do? But I did zero in on the final one. Are the social sciences ready for the challenges posed by the Anthropocene epoch? And I looked at that and I thought, well, are any of us? Are we ready for the challenges of the Anthropocene? And that becomes that kind of deflating answer, well, no, we're not ready. And then I thought, well, scientists are a subset of we. Are scientists ready? No, not either. And then I kind of start to feel like this. I start to kind of collapse in. And I thought this is a state a lot of scientists are in. The scientist activists, scientists, everyone on that spectrum, they're like this on some days. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes to tell you what pumps me back up, what gets me ready to go again. And it is 2 papers and 2 people. So the first paper, I have Henrik Österblom, who I see in the back, to thank for this one. It's a paper from 26 years ago, written by Jane Lubchenco. And this paper, when I found it, there's some kind of comfort you get from looking back in history, because you think, everything is new today. Everything is moving too fast. We need to adjust to this rapid, out-of-control developments. And then reading through this, I really encourage you, if you haven't read this recently or if you haven't read it at all, go back to it. It's amazing. So let me give you just a couple of bits from it. She starts out, how is our world changing? One major way is that we now live on a human-dominated planet. There's the Anthropocene already, right in the start of her paper. She goes on, the magnitude of human impacts on ecological systems of the planet becomes apparent. There's increased realization of the intimate connections between these systems and human health, the economy, social justice, and national security. There's plenty of social science in there already. Here's someone, a natural scientist born and bred, who's already saying we need to be holding hands with these other disciplines. And she said, keep it simple. The roles of science to discover, communicate, and use knowledge have not changed. It's the same job description that it's always been, but the needs of society have been altered dramatically. And so she proposes a new social contract for scientists. And there are 3 pieces, so it's not a long list, just 3 things to get done. The first is that, and this is very much echoed by Frank's presentation, that you need to also address the urgent needs of society. You can't dig into a niche topic and live your life there as a scientist. You should be connecting with the world around you. The world needs you. The second is to get out of your shell, communicate your knowledge and understanding widely in order to inform decisions of individuals and institutions. Easier said than done, but get out. Talk with people who are different than you. And finally, this is the toughest one. Exercise good judgment. Be wise. Be humble. These are some of the trickiest ones. But I look at all of this and I think, well, this is kind of the map. This is the rule book for a scientific career. This is what we should be doing, no matter what we're working on. And so this was written. I was a teenager when this was written, and then just 3 years later came this paper, and this is the second of the two. It's Sustainability Science, and I point out the final author on this, Une Svedin, is in the audience with us today. So happy to see. Hi, Uno. This paper is also a guiding light for an entire discipline that tries to be more than a discipline, that tries to connect across the world and across all of these different knowledge bases. And it actually sets this out as a thesis statement, that it would be a new field of sustainability science that tries to understand the fundamental character of interactions between nature and society. Get out of your silos, connect. And a few years later, also stating that sustainability science, it's different. It needs to be committed to moving all of the knowledge that's achieved and gathered into societal action. And this is where I looked at Frank's questions at the end of his presentation, and again, in a bit of despair, realized I don't have the answers, but I thought, yes, I want to talk about this. So I'm really excited about the panel discussion. How do you move it into societal action? Is it as an activist? Is it by holding hands with people on a highway somewhere? And finally, the test of its success will be whether it's able to address the great challenges of this century. But I said 2 papers, but I also wanted to mention, how did these 2 people turn out? So Jane Lubchenco, the author of that first paper 26 years ago, she sits in the White House today in the United States as the Deputy Director for Climate and Environment. And if you're reading about the US, I know it's all politics today, but behind the scenes, this is a person who's really moving things in a way that would make you smile. What she's contributing to this country it's pretty impressive. And Uno, who we all love, and I know we'll have the first question today, Uno, whose mind and excitement for sustainability science and for this work there's no master student in our center who can match him in that, and that's impressive to live a career like this. So this cheers me up. 2 papers, 2 people, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Can you hear me okay? Yes, so we have a half an hour. I have a couple of questions here, but there's also an opportunity to ask questions using Menti. If you need help, if you don't know how it works, ask your neighbor, and maybe your neighbor can help you with her or their cell phone. Please, step up. It's your time to shine. Thank you all for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to begin with my question, if that's okay. And I think it goes to all of you, but maybe beginning with Frank and then Anna. That has to do with the role of social sciences in this world. I think one thing that didn't come up was polarization. Increased polarization in society, identity politics, the misuse of science to advance certain interests, or maybe even the erosion of truth in the world. So what I'm thinking now is, of course, I mean, like you said, Robert, I mean, there's always been a call for science to get involved. But the fact that we are dealing with this reality, does that mean that we need to get involved in a different way? Do we need to be more careful in how we engage? Maybe we should even try to keep our heads a little bit cooler nowadays and not get too involved because of how the sentiments are at the moment and the risk of undermining our work. I mean, I know, Anna, you've thought a lot about this in the Nobel Foundation. You hosted this meeting in Washington, D.C. about trust and polarization. What are the challenges of engaging as a scientist in society that is very polarized in that context? Or is it just the same anyway? Who wants to begin? Do you want to begin, Frank?
It's a very, very difficult point, of course. I mean, I come from a country, the Netherlands, where the biggest party is led by people who don't believe in climate change. I mean, that's the bottom-up start in a sense. So how do you engage in a country where the majority of citizens vote for parties that do not share the basic ideas about what I'm doing and what I'm trying to communicate, climate change, but then also the related points of global justice, planetary justice, in a country which tries to close its borders and tries to stop development cooperation, etc., etc. And that makes it very difficult. And I think one important part, and this we try to communicate to our students, is of course to remain engaged. I mean, that's very important. I mean, so to remain, I always tell my students, get out of the bubbles in a sense. I mean, get out of the bubble of Utrecht, which is a university town, such as whatever, Lund, I guess, and these kind of places, where everybody is either a student or a professor, and everybody is somewhat leftish or oriented in many, many ways. And get out and try to build alliances. And that's also the point for politics, I think, for parties, I think, to find a new language, to also find just transition modes for our changes, to integrate everybody who is involved. And I will do this also personally. I joined an organization as a German foundation, which is based on a couple of German states of Germany, and they are also funded by the East German states. And I'm now in the academic board, and one of my assignments will be to go to East Germany and to be discussing with parliamentarians, where everybody is not everybody, but quite a few neo-Nazis are running around, and then I have to discuss climate change. And I don't know what to do, but I'm really looking forward to this new assignment, to have a new, I mean, not the friendly fire as I get here, but then a different kind of collaboration. It's new, I think, but the thing is very important, only looking out for that, to discuss with people who have a totally different worldview, different basis of information also, where these basic things like climate change are being disputed. And justice is being disputed, and collaboration is being disputed. So I'm looking forward to this. I think it's important to engage on that level for scientists, to reach out and not to stay in the bubble and say, this is my little town, everybody thinks like I think, fantastic restaurants, and I stay out of the trouble.
Well, I like the wording that you said, friendly fire, because I think also the academic discussion for someone from outside of academia might think that that is a very, not friendly discussion, but it's actually, that's how you do it in academia, that you try to prove the other one wrong. I think that can be very useful also when going out in a polarized world. Of course, we had a big challenge when we, together with the Beijer and Stockholm Resilience Centre some years ago, had a summit supposed to be in DC on climate change and loss of biodiversity, and in a world where actually when we, as a Nobel organization located in Sweden, but a global brand, but the Nobel Prize is very international, of course, maybe got shocked by how polarized and difficult these questions were to work in the US. And then some years after, having a summit on mis and disinformation and the erosion of trust in science. But also we collaborated with you here, of course, the best scientists, also with the National Academy of Sciences in the US, who were extremely used to this. I think as coming from the academic world, you feel frustrated when you think that an academic question is a political question, when you think that, at least for me as a PhD student, in my ideal world was that research is research and it doesn't matter who does it, where it's made, or what the results are. Of course, that is not what we see now, and increasingly also in Europe and the governments around. But I think if you stick to that, you always come back to that you're talking about the science, that the science is the basis, as you're talking about the evidence-based decision-making, and that this is feeding in. You don't claim that you have the competences to have the overall view, as the politicians should have in the best of world, or that you know the truth and that you are open to discussion and dialogue. I think that's the best thing that we as an organization and as an academic society can do, to invite for discussions, and that we are open to this, and that we're not afraid to have different opinions, that you actually invite to talk, and that you try to make these platforms and arenas where you have these kind of discussions that are open for, and are curious to hear each other's thoughts. I think that's very important.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, it sparks one thought with me, which maybe you can help us with in sort of academics. Is I think that I agree that we need to talk across, and I said that in my sort of speech thing. But I also think that when we're in a space like the academy, for example, we know the common rules by which we're disagreeing. We know there are certain parameters. But when we step outside of those parameters, and then we're having a debate where there are no rules, or the rules are completely rewritten, or we're unaware of, that's where it starts to get really challenging. And that's where I think we need help as researchers in how to navigate that. And I don't know if that's something that we will, because at the moment I think as individuals we're navigating that. So if you write an article that goes out, you might get slammed and trolled and so on. So people are being a little bit cautious. Or you might get the newspapers writing about you. We have some researchers, younger researchers who have this experience in our institutions. So for me, it's like, how have the rules changed? Is there a new social contract that we're not aware of? And how do we navigate that? So it raises questions for me. I guess as a researcher, it's interesting because I can research these questions, or we will all be researching these questions. But then the reality of how we actually situate ourselves in this is a bit more tricky. I don't know if you have any answers.
It's unlikely, but it's a nice pass. I was just reflecting. I think in this room there are a lot of scientists who, if you asked them to raise your hand if you're a scientist, you would all raise your hand. But I think inside there's a diversity of natures. So some of you, deep inside, you're a poet, or you're an activist, or you're an academic who really does want to develop theory, and that's your joy. And that's your nature. So if you have that activist inside of you, it's going to come out at some point, or else you're going to be depressed by not letting that out. And I think that our role, like when we look around and we suddenly discover there's a poet or an activist in our midst, is to support them. It's like a family. You allow for there to be a diversity, and you be supportive of that. So I think that it's something I really value at the center I work at, that the leadership has been very encouraging and supportive of people who do different things. So, but not everyone has that. And I understand like the incentives also for careers and so forth, they're not there necessarily for the scientists, poets, and so forth. But the activists should be welcome in that space, I think.
You want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, because I think this thing that we also saw during the pandemic, and as you're talking about individual scientists, and I think you also were a little bit mentioning that I think it's listen to science, but maybe not listen to a scientist. And there I think academies can have an enormously important role of bringing the scientists together. So you shouldn't be like alone, because then that's not how science works. It's not one opinion or one work that makes the whole picture, and sometimes that one work can actually be wrong. So I think academies have an enormously potential to take that role, where to also be a safe haven for researchers who want to speak, but to unify and to have, this is like Kalle has done so beautiful many times, this is the knowledge we have right now, and this is what this field says about this, especially for politicians or others. Just
No, that's good. I mean, I think I want to think a little bit more on the tensions. Right, because now at the moment it sounds like we're all in agreement. We just need to get involved, but there are tensions in that. So let's unpack that a little bit. I want to thanks. I mean, Frank, you brought up your engagement with the solar radiation management issue and that topic, and I thought, I mean, getting involved in that, I assume, is a little bit time consuming. First of all, but what was the response from your colleagues in the domain making that shift? I mean, seeing you from the outside, there was a little bit of a shift for you in terms of how you engaged, right? Being so vocal on such an issue. But what was the response from your colleagues? Were all like positive to it, or did someone tell you like, now you're getting too mixed into politics? Think about the role you're setting to younger scientists, etc.
Well, I mean, personally, I had these political issues before. So I was at one point, I was arguing for World Environment Organization or for something on climate migration. So I have always seen myself as a political scientist who has certain propositions that you try to propose to governments and United Nations agencies. This is new now at the level. I mean, soil engineering is more because there has been a lot of positive response by many people who signed this, or at least liked it in a sense. There are also some scientists who support it, but say, I don't sign open letters, also possible. But, of course, I mean, that's why I showed this one slide. We argue for restrictions on public funding for a particular type of research. And you can imagine that those researchers that do this particular type of research are not happy. I mean, there are people who really build their careers on geoengineering research. I mean, number one is because that's their field. They come from cloud research, they come from certain areas of atmospheric chemistry and have built their career. To some extent also because they believe that this is a solution for the world. They come with a very deep feeling, as you mentioned, to believe that I know the solution for all the troubles, and I will somehow get them right, but they're very, very important. And then suddenly these folks come up and say, we don't want to have public funding, which is a practical problem, no public funding, but it's also a value statement in a sense, because no public funding, because what these guys are doing is dangerous for the planet. It's not a plan B, it's not a solution, it's a danger. And it's also in the North-South context, it's unfair, it's unjust. So when the African countries, for example, say we want to have a non-use agreement, the African countries say we don't want to have geoengineering research. It's of course a very tenuous process, so therefore not everybody is as happy. So we got a little bit also on social media a commentary from people who says we are taking away their jobs, for example. I mean, people say I'm a poor postdoc, and I need to have my money, and now these folks say that we should not get any funding anymore. And these are things you have. I mean, you have them also in other issues. You have them when you talk about human cloning, for example, certain areas of nuclear energy in some countries, in a sense. So it's not the only issue, and I believe there are many issues. Actually, Antarctic mining, for example, is another issue where some people say it should be banned forever, and others say, well, let's talk about it at some point, maybe. I mean, the technology is not necessarily the issue, it's more the way where you deploy. Deep seabed mining is another issue. So there are quite a few technologies where we have to have engagements at the global level. Do we want it, or should it rather be banned? And it's quite a few technologies. I mean, one example is chemical weapons. It's banned. Also for researchers, you can't sit there in your university and say, oh, this morning I will develop a chemical bomb because I'm very curious as a scientist. Just try out whether it works. And it's banned. I mean, you will be imprisoned. So then the point is geoengineering similar or not? And that is, so that is kind of not always easy, especially when careers are affected. So it's not a way where everybody will be affected.
What have you? Question for you, Robert. You're the young scientist here on the panel. I mean, you work across the science policy interface a little bit. Of course, it's exciting, it's all fun, you learn a lot. Is there a tension there, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, for sure there's a tension, and I was thinking of the photos in Frank's presentation of the UN General Assembly room, where you can just imagine all of these important people in the room, and I think as a young scientist, if you walk into that room, your jaw drops and your eyes go wide, and you think, I'm part of something big, I'm there. But I think also within a few hours of being there, you'll notice, if I talk to that person in this way, they'll love me forever. If I talk with that person in this way, they're going to shut me out. Conversation is over. I'm not going to talk with that one. They look unfriendly anyway. And you can immediately see, like, here's the receptive audience. And I think for some issues like geoengineering or seabed mining, I think academics will often go into these settings and they'll immediately identify, this NGO shares my viewpoints. They're receptive to every paper I publish. They love me. I'm going to work with them. And I think that that's a dangerous space. And I think that that's the path of least resistance if you're in a science policy space, because it's exciting to have people interested in you and your work and your answers. But I think that you have more value and more longevity if you really come just with your science. You share that with everyone equally. You talk with that grumpy person also. Sorry, Kala, I'm not pointing at you, but I think that's the long-term goal. But I don't know. It's complicated, and I think if you're a young person like me, thank you by the way, that's the time to make these mistakes, because I think for people who are in more senior positions, the entire institute may rest on their decision, and that's pretty uncomfortable, I think, because then you change the career trajectories of 50 people just by engaging in something. As a young person, you're kind of on your own, maybe. Yeah. You should be able to fall on your face a few times.
We're getting, there are questions here. Thanks for all filling in stuff in the Menti about the social sciences. Has the social sciences become more collaborative is one question. what are the things that political science can do to contribute to better global governance? Also, dimensions of whether political science needs to move away from theory to practice, or more investigating solutions rather than just developing theory. So going to that point on interdisciplinarity, and for the rest of us who are more senior here, how can we support young scientists in our roles that want to conduct that kind of career? What can we do? What's our responsibility? Where can we make sure things move? What would you say, Emily? And then...
So I think, so given that all the conditions are perfect around, let's say, we pretend, so we have plenty of funding and our institutions are open to it, then I think we as more seniors can bring people together and we can connect younger researchers in ways maybe that they haven't seen themselves. You know, provide the platform and the forum. There are many good examples of that around, both here at Stockholm, you know, bringing young scholars together and help them in a structured way to create a pathway. I think that really helps at that stage. I think that we can also be quite open about the pathways, what they entail as well. So, you know, it's a different pathway maybe, and it has its challenges, but to be open about those challenges and still say it's worth it. It's fun, it's exciting, and it's important.
Any additions, Anna or Frank? One reflection I had before we jump in this last year, this year's Nobel Awards, Prize Awards, was a lot of interdisciplinarity came out from that. That was my experience. You mentioned the in physics and deep learning. That's, to me, that's like a truly deeply interdisciplinary field. And I guess also the prize in economics. Are we overstating the need for interdisciplinarity? Maybe it's out there already, or are there other ways that we can support it? Do you want to add something to that?
No, well, I don't think we're overstating it. I think, as you also see in the prizes, that they tend to be more of a many more. Maybe before it was more narrow what was physics, and now it's like it's work that needs a lot of different angles. Like this, the economy prize that was in different fields, also within economy, that was also political sciences and those things that were connected, even if it was in the big field, one field. And I think what we also, in the Nobel, we have the awards and the prizes that we can work, or we can talk about, discover the work that has been awarded. Then we have our laureates that can, together with young researchers, serve as an enormous amount of both inspiration and giving them courage, and also sharing knowledge on how to work with these things, as for example advising policymakers or others. That is a very nice way of working. And then of course creating platforms where people of different backgrounds, expertise, competencies, both within different disciplines, but also between different sectors and different countries. And also the fact of science diplomacy that I like a lot, where that the scientific conversation actually leads to some added values that you learn about each other's, but it also ultimately will bring peace, you know, by that scientists continue to talk to each other's.
Frank, how do you support young scholars' interdisciplinary journey?
There's lots to be said, but there are 3 points. I mean, the one point is freedom. I think that's very important. I mean, if institute leaders, you meant, for example, that there's a certain positions you have to, of course, make a safe space where everybody can have their own views. So I have one PhD student who is supporting geoengineering research. That's kind of a very interesting relationship. So he's actually running the other side in a sense, and he's my PhD student. We have a relationship, and it works in a sense. So there will be at some point a PhD about these issues where there are different views, and we discuss on where are the disagreements and how that leads to a PhD. But very important is to give these spaces. That's number one. Number two is protection. You talked about the societal contract. One important part of societal contract is that these right-wing movements in all our countries are anti-intellectual and anti-university. And that means, and then combined with social media. So there's a lot of attacks against the social scientists and other scientists, of course. And then it's very important to find ways to protect young scientists in all of these matters. Also geoengineering, for example, that at some point it's important to protect this younger scientists by standing in front, in a sense, and taking all the negative criticism on Twitter and not necessarily that shared. The third point, and that relates to your question, is honesty, and that's very important also in terms of career coaching in political science. That what I presented in a way is a minority position. And, I mean, one has to be honest that in terms of a postdoc in political science, that most jobs in academia are in traditional disciplinary political science. So if you want to end up in a department of political science as a professor of political theory or professor of comparative politics, don't listen to Frank Biermann. I mean, that's very important. And I mean, there are jobs. I mean, you might get a job in an interdisciplinary institute, such as here, for example, but you won't get a job at a disciplinary department, or very rarely, or in a certain conditions. One has to be honest about it, in a sense. So if you follow this path, as you listen to this talk, it might reduce your chances of getting a job later. Or you have to be very specialized and be somewhere between Utrecht and Stockholm and Lund, whatever.
But the job you get will be amazing, though.
That's of course.
I mean,
you could work with like us. That's possible.
So we have 1 more minute. So I have one last question for each one of you. Looking forward. And in this very big, complex question about science and policy, what do you look forward to in the next year in this domain? Something exciting that is happening, something that you want to share with people in here. You want to go first, Robert?
Yeah, I'll let my activist heart sing for a moment then. Seabed mining, I don't know where you stand on this, Frank, but I think it's a total disaster waiting to happen. So I'm encouraged that right now there's a new executive secretary who's been elected to the International Seabed Authority, the international organization that manages these issues. She's from Brazil. She has a scientific background. I expect that's going to change the entire dynamic of the discussion, which has become very cynical and quite dark. And at the same time, all the natural scientists who are plugging away at all the new innovations on battery design and everything else, they can really shine here too, because get that right, you don't need all those minerals. And that's my hope. Next year, it's all going to happen.
I guess maybe not excited by, but feel the need, compelled to continue pushing forward the area of understanding how we live under extremes. What happens when places, how we move, mobility within that, and questions about why do we stay in places and how can we stay in places.
Important question.
So I know that these big global organizations working for the benefit of mankind, they are quite weakened, and we don't have that strong as we maybe would like. I'm looking forward to see how the work that UN has been doing on making a code of conduct on information integrity, how that, I would hope for it to be implemented, be recognized and applied all over the world, so that we can, because the information integrity is so important for all different areas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. Frank, last words.
My main work is on the SDGs. So the SDGs agreed upon in 2015. Our work has shown they don't work. They're not effective. They don't really make a lot of progress in countries. So in 2030, there's a discussion now to renew them. I want to be part of that. And I really would like to hope that this Agenda 2030 and the SDGs will become a success in the next couple of years and after 2030. So I, in the science policy interface, I really want to try to have a little role in these matters to play. In addition to engineering, that's one part of one, but the SDGs, I really think, is the main agenda of our global governance system, and I would like to drive this forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm not even going to try to summarize the discussion, but it was a truly interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, diverse discussion about science and society. Thank you very much for being here. Congratulations, Frank. Thank you.